Okay, so this is just going to be a brief video introducing the basics of Photoshop and how to do a little kind of photo editing and touch-up. And finally, I'll talk about how to crop out the background in your photos. So I have an image here of a basket. So with my Photoshop open, I'm just going to drag this image in and let go. And it should automatically open up a file that's pre-sized to the dimensions of my photo here. One of the first things about Photoshop is that if you want to resize your image or resize the canvas, like the kind of dimensions of how it's cropped, up at the top, you can go to Image, and you can go to Image Size. So by default, this picture was taken with my phone. So, and you can see it's got a lot of pixels. It's a really high resolution image. So, and if we look up here at the dimensions, so that stands for 4,000 pixels by 3,000 pixels. We can leave it like that for now, but for some things we may want to reduce the size of the image just to make it a smaller file, or to be able to save it and send it a little bit easier and stuff like that. You can see it's about 35 megabytes, which is fairly large. So I'm going to go ahead and just make it, and I'll keep this button here on the left clicked, and I'll make it about, make it much smaller than it is. I'll resize it to about what my page size is, which is probably still bigger than I need it to be, but so I'll resize it to a width of 17. You can see because I have the little lock button pressed that it automatically resized the height as well, and then I'll click OK. You can see it kind of got further away, and that's just because it resized to a smaller image. So in Photoshop, there's a couple ways you can zoom in and out. You can press Control plus and minus. I think you can do Alt, hold Alt on the keyboard and scroll with your mouse wheel. And my personal favorite is to press Control space. You can see that brings up the zoom tool, and then I left click and drag with my mouse in and out to zoom in and out right there. So that one's quite easy. You can also press space to pan around your image. There we go. So zooming in, you can see we haven't really lost much detail to our image, but it should be a much smaller file and much less resolution now. So what I'm going to show you now is how to do just really simple like adjustments in Photoshop. There's a couple ways to do this. My recommended way is to do it in the Layers panel. So over here on the right, you see the Layers panel. If you don't have one of these, you can go to Window up at the top. This is where you can open and close most kind of different tools and panels in Photoshop. And so over here on the right, you see we have our layer, which is our image there. And down at the bottom of the Layers panel, we have a couple different icons. I'm going to click on the circle, the like black and white circle. And in here, these are all of the different types of adjustments that you can do in Photoshop. So if I go to, so like they're also grouped, generally speaking, by kind of what they do. So these ones all deal with color, for example. These ones all deal with light and dark. So I'll start with curves, actually. So what this does, and again, you should see a properties panel like this appear somewhere. If you don't, I think it's in the adjustments panel. And you'll also notice that a new layer was created in my layers panel right here. And what this allows me to do is just change the balance of light and dark in my image. So if I click somewhere on that line and I start dragging it with my mouse, you can see my image gets lighter and darker. Now, if we look here at the bars going from dark to light, what we can do is kind of remap different ranges of light and dark in our image by making multiple points on this curve. And, make a lot of different points, and we can do really crazy stuff. If you ever want to get rid of a point, you just grab it and drag it out. It's gone. So what we want to do is kind of basically bring a little more contrast and a little more definition to the image without compromising the quality or making it look too weird or anything like that. We can always just check what our adjustments have done for us by turning the visibility of this curves layer on and off. Yeah, so one of the reasons I love about one of the reasons I like to do it this way as a layer is that it means we can always go back and change it later. We don't have, it's not permanent like it is with other methods of changing the kind of balance of the image. Anyway, so we can play around with that a little bit and just get something that's got a little more definition to it. Yeah, so you can see if I'm moving around down here, I'm changing the kind of darker stuff more. And up here, I'm changing the lighter stuff more. So, and you can also play around with different ways of adjusting. So there's also levels. So this one, again, affects the balance of the kind of range of light to dark in your image. A couple different ways you can do that. I'm just going to go ahead and delete that, actually. And then there's also, exposure. And this is with the highs and lows. Okay, and then finally, I also want to make my image black and white. So if I go to that adjustment layer button again and click on black and white. And we can do a little bit of adjustment here if we want to change like how light and dark certain values are in our image. So, you know, anything that was kind of yellow in the original image, we can change how light or dark it is. So most of the kind of surface of the basket there is a kind of yellowy tone. We can adjust that more specifically. A lot of the kind of shadow over here is more blue. You can see we can adjust that more specifically. Anyway, so what you're looking for is kind of, again, just like good contrast without compromising, you know, visibility or definition. And then if we turn those off, you can kind of see what the adjustments have resulted in there. That looks pretty good to me. We can also adjust the size or proportion of the image. So for example, if I wanted to crop this to become a little bit smaller, there's two ways I can do that. I can go to image at the top, and I can go to, instead of image size, which resizes the overall image, I can go to canvas size, and that'll actually crop my image. So if I wanted to make it slightly narrower, for instance, if I change that to 15, click OK, you can see it cropped my image. Now I will say, actually, I just hit Control Z. You can also go to Edit, Step Backward. So yeah, Control Z will undo and redo the last thing you did in Photoshop. And then if I want to keep going back, I have to press, look here, step backward, I have to press Control Alt Z. So I can keep going back in the steps of all the things I've done. And then if I want to go forward, I can go Shift Control Z. Or I can just press the button from the menu there. There's a limited number of steps it'll save, but anyway. Before I actually crop my image, what I wanted to do is see how it says background here, and there's like a lock icon. I want to unlock or unmake this background. What that means is I can't move it or adjust it really. So to make this just a regular layer, I'll just double click in the blank part of the layer there. It's going to say new layer. That's okay. And then I'll just click OK. Okay, and so what that means is I've like unlocked this layer. So now you can see I can move it around within the canvas, and you know, you can see that there's nothing really else in my document here. And so now if I were to go to canvas size and make it narrower, then you can see that I can still move around my image, and I haven't actually lost anything that was outside of where I've cropped it, you know. So I can do that like that. The other way you can do it is you can use what's called the cropping tool. You can hit C on the keyboard, or you can go to this little image that looks like two frames intersecting each other, two squares. And then you'll see I get like a series of grips around the outside, and I can just click and drag them. I can also, up here, I can set a ratio between the height and width of the image. That will mean that it keeps it constrained. And I can also like set a dimension here between the height and width. Again, that'll keep it constrained to a certain proportion. Let's see. And then I can also grab the image to kind of center it here. When you're done, just press Enter on the keyboard. And there you go. So we've cropped it and kind of repositioned it at the same time. So finally, when you're done, what you want to do is save it as a PSD file. A PSD file is a type of file that Photoshop can read. I'll go to File, Save As, and I'm going to go to this folder. I think I'm already there, actually. Perfect. Okay. I'll go to, let's call this my test. And then under Save As Type, I want to save it as a .psd or a Photoshop file. And what that does is every time I open up this Photoshop file, I'll have all my layers and all the things that I've been adjusting, and I can, edit it more if I want to. Finally, I can also go to Save As and save it as a .jpeg. And what .jpeg will do is it'll flatten it. That means it's none of these layers that I've used to adjust the image will be there. But if I open that image file, you can see it's the edited version of my image. Okay, and finally, I want to show you how to crop out the background. If you were to place an image of your basket and you wanted to have no background in like a presentation document or something like that, then this is how you do that. So over here on the left, there's a couple different tools, like selection tools, like we can select kind of rectangular shaped areas of our image and move them around. We can also use what's called the polygonal lasso tool to like make more complex shaped selections. And those can all be useful at times. And there's also something called the magic wand tool. So if I had a really simple background here, which I kind of don't because there's some texture in that background that I've got here, but I could select it with the magic wand tool. And what that does is it'll just select everything that has a kind of similar color to it. So for instance, if I clicked on the darker stuff in my basket, you can see it's selecting mostly darker stuff that's in the image. It doesn't do a great job because there's still quite a lot of range in terms of the dark stuff. But anyway, so that's one way, and it works best if you have really kind of clearly defined colors and shapes in your image. And the best thing, I think, for an image like this is to use something called the quick selection tool. So if I click and hold my mouse on one of these buttons, you can see there's a couple different tools that are kind of within that button. So I'll click the quick selection tool. Now the quick selection tool is like a brush. So up here on the top of my control panel, I can make it larger. Oops, I didn't need that. So let's see. So I can resize this like I would the paintbrush tool. Now, if I click on the little icon of the paintbrush here, I can also adjust the size of it there. So you can see it's getting larger and smaller based on what I've set that value to. Now, the hardness is something else that's like, if you look at this little diagram here, you can see that the edge gets a lot sharper or a lot fuzzier, depending on how I set the hardness. So that really defines the kind of crispness of where I'm selecting. So anyway, so I'll go for like a mid-range. The other thing that I love in Photoshop, you can do Alt on the keyboard, right-click and drag your mouse to the right and left to change the size, up and down to change the hardness, which is a really quick and convenient way to do it. Anyway, so now what I want to do is kind of like use the paintbrush to select the part of the image that I want to keep. In other words, I want to kind of paint in the basket. And you can see there when you look at the little dashed line that it's kind of automatically filling in certain things for me. So it's kind of a smart tool in the sense that it's detecting what it thinks I want and extrapolating. And then when I let go of the mouse, you can see that it kind of settles on certain selection. And so I'll just go around the whole perimeter here, and I'm trying to be pretty close to the edge. Again, we have pretty good contrast between the basket and the background still, so it's doing a pretty good job. But for instance, over here, where it grabbed a little bit of that shadow, I'd like to remove that from my selection. So I can hold Alt on the keyboard, or I can go to the minus sign, and that deselects stuff. I'll go back to plus, And just make sure I have everything within the basket selected. That's doing a really pretty good job there. And when I'm done with that, I'll go up to the top and click on Select and Mask. And that'll give me a preview of kind of what the image will look like once I've removed the background. And it also gives me the option to kind of make some adjustments, some fine adjustments here. So you can see I can mess with the kind of feathered or defined that edge is. Stuff. Anyway, so once you're happy with that, you can also expand or contract just a little bit. Cool. And then once you're happy, you just go ahead and click OK. Now, all that's done is adjust very slightly my selection. Messing it up now. It can also help with details to like resize your brush to smaller. Anyway, so once I'm done with my selection, then I can actually crop my image. My favorite way to crop the image, you can also like just delete the background. But again, just to preserve it so that we can make adjustments in the future if we want. I think the best way to crop stuff is to do what's called creating a layer mask. So down here in the layers panel, there's a little square with a circle inside of it. I'll click on that. And you can see what that's done is it's cropped the background of the image out. It's also added another little thumbnail next to my image. And if I look at that thumbnail, you can see it's got like black and white in it. If I hold Alt and click on it, you can see that it's black in the areas where it's invisible and white in the areas where it's visible. So this is like another mask that I've put over the image, and I'm telling it anywhere where I paint in black, I want the image to disappear. Anywhere where I paint in light, or in white, I should say, I want it to appear. And we can also do grayscale and stuff for semi-transparent. But if I go to the brush tool, and again, we look at if I click on either one of these, you can see there's little brackets around which one's selected. So if I make sure I'm on the transparency mask, go to my brush tool and start painting. Oops, sorry. Make sure I'm in white. It'll bring that background image back. And if I paint in black, it'll make it disappear again. So again, that just allows me to do like kind of fine tune adjustments or adjust it later if I want to change something about my image. Anyway, so that's how to crop the background out of your image like that. So if you were going to use an image like this in a presentation, once you've done this, once you've done it, so you would see the little checkerboard background, that's the part of the image that's like transparent, there's nothing there. And then if I go to File, Save As, I want to save this in order to preserve that background transparency as something called a .png. Down here in my Save As Type, you can see I have that option. So I'll save it as test.png. I don't know if you'll be able to tell. So there you can see that the JPEG. That's the JPEG. There's the JPEG. So you can see it has a background, and this one does not. And the same will be true if I were to place it into a PDF file or something like that, right? So I could have like images behind it or in front of it. I could have text kind of within the boundary of the image and that kind of stuff. Anyway, so that concludes this brief video.